Welcome to meeting number 24 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Health. Today's meeting is in a place of a hybrid format pursuant to the standing orders, and would like to remind participants of the following points. For those participating by video conferencing, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. A reminder that all comments should be through the chair. And pursuant to Standing Order 108-2 and the motion adopted by the committee on Tuesday, September 23rd, 2025, the committee shall commence its study on Canada's pharmaceutical sovereignty. And I would like to welcome our witnesses today from Apotex, Jeff Watson, President and Chief Executive Officer as an individual, Michael Bouvier, Professor, Julian M. Summers, full professor by video conferencing. From Canadian Generic Pharmaceutical Association, Jim Keon, President. Jody Cox, Vice President. From Canadian Pharmaceutical Manufacturers and Exporters Alliance, Terry Creighton, President. From Innovative Medicines Canada, Bettina Hamlin, President and CEO. And Michael Dietrich, Vice President, Marketing, Access and Policy. And they're by video conference. So welcome everyone. We've got quite a list lined up here this afternoon. And so we'll start on...
Monsieur le Président.
Yes, sir. Wait, hang on.
Mr. Chair.
Everybody else, heck, and I didn't do it myself. Go ahead, Max.
Premièrement, je veux vous féliciter. Vous faites un très bon travail.
Well, first of all, congratulations. You're doing a great job as the vice chair, replacing the chair. Allow me to ask for unanimous consent. This might be a technicality, but just to make sure that the committee functions properly. Committee meetings should be divided into 2 blocks of 1 hour, and then we should have 3 witnesses per hour for the following meetings.
Yes, and I believe that was the agreement we made right at the very first. Is the committee agreement with that? Okay, so we'll adjust accordingly, clerk? It's unanimous consent. Yeah, okay. Very good. Mr. Strauss?
Chair, we had Grifols, the pharmaceutical company, on our work list to appear today. I'm wondering if you could advise us or the clerk why they aren't here today.
I believe they declined, did they not? Yeah. So they said that they declined, right? So they have declined.
Then, Chair, that was my suspicion. So, given that, I have a motion to summon the president of Grifols or some other representative of Grifols to our committee to testify.
Can you send that around?
It is sent around.
Okay. Thank you. Yes, please.
Given that Grifols and Grifols Canada have declined the committee's invitation to appear at its study on Canada's pharmaceutical sovereignty, the committee summoned Mary Hughes, Vice President of Commercial Operations for Grifols Canada, to appear no later than March 27th, 2026.
Ms. Chi, I guess we'll...
Email, yeah. Can you send it around? Yeah, can we just pause, Chair? Yeah.
We shall pause.
Yeah.
We're back in order.
Yeah, can I just make a suggestion of the wording in the motion to specify, to clarify that this will be part of a panel of witnesses, not just, you know, just to suggest a panel of witnesses. Clerk, would you be able to make that revision? So, you know, on top of summoning Griffles and Griffles Canada, to clarify that they will be they will be summoned, but they will be part of a panel of witnesses as part of the pharmaceutical sovereignty study. Yeah.
I think she'd have unanimous consent to make that revision.
You guys want to break and talk about it?
Thank you, Chair. Could I just ask the member opposite why this rather extreme measure is seen to be necessary from his point of view? I'm relatively new to this committee, so maybe I've missed something, but perhaps, as you know, it is an extreme measure, why he feels it's necessary.
Well, welcome to the committee. So this I think the reason they declined the invitation to come is that they were in the news quite a bit about selling blood product that was donated to Canadian Blood Services abroad for profit. And that is contrary both to the policy of Canadian Blood Services and a promise that Canadian Blood Service makes to the donors. And I think it speaks directly to Canadian pharmaceutical sovereignty if Canadians' blood is literally being drained and sold abroad for profit. So I am not surprised that they declined their invitation to discuss that with us, but I think what they're doing is relatively extreme. I don't think the invitation or the summons is extreme. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. Oh, by the way, you're doing an excellent job, so good to see you. Yeah. I meant to say that at the beginning. So just wondering if we can invite them. I remember last time we did invite, because summoning is quite an extreme measure, and, you know, happy to really revisit summoning again. So we're just wondering if the member is open to, Matt is open to re-inviting.
No, thank you. I think I don't think other invitations are likely to be any more likely to be accepted than the one that was already sent out.
And just to recap, like when we invited the University of Toronto, there was they at least tried to reach out, and they said there was some kind of miscommunication, but ultimately we had to summon them at the end of the day anyways. So this will at least get their attention, and they will get to a higher degree of whoever's going to end up getting summoned to the committee. So would that require any kind of?
Yeah, if she wants an amendment, she'll have to send it by email.
Get to send it. Can you just, yeah.
Send it? Okay. We'll take a quick 5-minute pause.
Oh,
We'll do that.
no,
No?
we got witnesses here and all that.
Do you want to deal with it after the witnesses?
If we could just have, all the committee agrees the intent as far as they're not going to be separated out or anything, they're part of another panel. That
Yeah.
is, this is on public record, we all know the intent. Yes, sir.
Can we have something typed up immediately and distributed?
I just, in the essence of time, I think if we have good faith here, I think we can make it work back in the clerk's office once we get it typed up. But
I don't know, like administratively, are you okay with just, or you?
whatever
need
the committee
somebody-
decides, we can instruct the clerk of whatever we want to do.
Or we can type it up really quickly right now. I can do it really quickly.
Yeah, we've got 30 minutes of testimony to carry on with today, and the rest of a bunch of witnesses online. So I would highly discourage that, but it's up to the committee.
Are you guys with just?
Chair, could I seek unanimous consent to add at the end of this motion as part of a panel for 1 hour?
All agreed? There you go.
Is an amendment, yes.
Okay, we're back in, we have to agree to we said, so just so we're clear, we're all okay, in unanimous consent, that we're okay with the amendment, that Griffiths will be part of a panel. Okay, and then we'll get it clarified with the clerk on as far as the wordage after the meeting. Thank you so much, committee. And with that, we shall start into testimony from our witnesses and Mr. Watson for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Vice Chair and members of the committee. My name is Jeff Watson, President and CEO of Apotex Canada. Apotex greatly appreciates this important and timely opportunity to contribute to the Standing Committee on Health Study of Pharmaceutical Sovereignty in Canada. There's no question that the pandemic experience, coupled with recent shifts to the international political and economic environment, heightened the urgency of a public policy response to ensure Canadian patients and the healthcare system more broadly continue to have access to critical generic medicines that domestic producers like Apotex manufacture. As a Canadian company founded over 50 years ago in Toronto, Apotex today is a unique Canadian pharmaceutical manufacturing asset with 5 FDA and Health Canada approved manufacturing sites, employing over 6,000 employees worldwide and 4,000 here in Canada. To remain state-of-the-art, Apotex annually spends over $500 million in Canada on its operations and plans to invest $900 million in R&D and capital expenditures over the next 5 years. Importantly, while based in Ontario, Apotex is a global company providing drugs and therapeutics for millions of patients in over 70 countries. Apotex is also Canada's largest exporter of generic drugs and therapeutics to the U.S. market. The manufacturing facilities, together with its global head office in Toronto, makes Apotex Canada's largest pharmaceutical company, pharmaceutical manufacturer, and pharmaceutical employer. It's from this vantage point I offer perspectives in the context of the committee study. Regarding pharmaceutical sovereignty and the COVID-19 experience, while likely shaped by current events, which I will address later in my remarks, the committee's standing reflects a common concern of many governments which, following the COVID-19 experience, recognized the risks of not developing pharmaceutical sovereignty. As a result of the pandemic, many countries developed and implemented strategic plans to prepare for the next pandemic-like event. Canada prudently sought to address gaps in its life sciences ecosystem through biomanufacturing and life sciences strategy and its corresponding investments. The Apotex pandemic experience provides valuable lessons regarding the importance of having a strong domestic generic pharmaceutical manufacturing sector with companies like Apotex at its core. From the outset of the pandemic, Apotex was called upon by governments and acted unilaterally to address evolving pandemic-related healthcare challenges for which the company was uniquely positioned to address. Unilaterally, Apotex quickly identified ways in which it could shift its manufacturing platform and supply chain to meet emerging and urgent healthcare needs. For example, early in the pandemic, when sanitizer was in short supply, Apotex was able to retrofit its Brantford facility, normally a dedicated active pharmaceutical ingredient site, to manufacture hand sanitizer, which we donated to healthcare organizations in Canada. As a manufacturer of hydroxychloroquine, we donated 2 million dosages of the product for clinical trials to evaluate the effectiveness of hydroxychloroquine in treating COVID-19. Most importantly, when other countries came to us, we prioritized Canadian patients to ensure we had enough product to cover those who needed the drug for other indications such as rheumatoid arthritis and lupus. The effective Apotex government relationship that emerged during the pandemic ensured Canadian patients had access to vital generic drugs and serves to underscore the importance of having direct access to domestic generic manufacturing capacity during a health crisis. We are currently experiencing a global shift. A new global pharmaceutical manufacturer landscape is emerging as jurisdictions such as the U.S. in the past 6 months have implemented over 10 specific measures aimed at supporting existing manufacturers and attracting companies and manufacturers from other jurisdictions. Making Canadian pharmaceutical manufacturing a policy priority, which is why I'm happy to attend here today with all of you. Given those policy incentives being adopted in the U.S. and Europe, and the over-reliance on the generic pharmaceuticals produced outside of North America, Canada's pharmaceutical manufacturing sovereignty is at risk. Accordingly, we strongly urge the committee to recommend the government add generic pharmaceutical manufacturing as a priority sector within the Buy Canadian policy. Apotex strongly endorses the recommendations made by the CPMEA, colleague here joining today, and would emphasize the need for the Buy Canadian policy initiative to provide Canadian generic pharmaceutical manufacturers with a dedicated regulatory approval process and establish a preference for Canadian manufactured generic products in the context of the federal government, for federal procurement.
You're out of
Vice Chair, that concludes my remarks. Again, on behalf of Apotex, I'd like to thank you with the opportunity to contribute to the committee's important study and look forward to questions from the committee that some of the committee members may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Watson. Mr. Bouvier, 5 minutes. Welcome.
Merci. Monsieur le Vice-président.
Mr. Vice Chair, members of the committee, thank you for this opportunity to contribute to your reflection on Canada's pharmaceutical sovereignty. I am Michel Bouvier, Professor of Biochemistry and Molecular Medicine at the University of Montreal and Principal Investigator at the Institute for Research and Immunology and Cancer. I led this cutting-edge institute with over 400 scientists for 10 years until June 2024. I also co-founded IRICOR, which is an organization dedicated to the protection of intellectual property, the valorization and commercialization of research, whose mission is to transform scientific discoveries from university laboratories into concrete therapeutic applications, notably through partnerships with biopharmaceutical industry and the creation of spin-off companies here in Canada. Today, I'd like to talk to you about the IRICOR model, which illustrates how innovation infrastructures can contribute directly to Canada's pharmaceutical sovereignty. Pharmaceutical sovereignty is not just about the ability to manufacture drugs. It begins well upstream with the ability to innovate locally, develop tools, discover new therapies, and bring them through to clinical development. This is precisely why the federal government created in 2007 the Centers of Excellence for Commercialization and Research Program, the CECR. Thanks to this program, IRIC has been able to develop, alongside its basic research activities, a major academic drug discovery unit. Today, this infrastructure is one of the largest of its kind in the world, with over 70 chemists and biologists dedicated to drug discovery in a university setting. The strength of this model lies in the synergy between three complementary components: a top-level academic research institute, an integrated drug discovery platform, and a structure dedicated to commercializing innovations. This combination creates a real ecosystem of therapeutic innovation. In concrete terms, this model has already produced tangible results. It has led to the creation of 5 spin-off companies operating in Canada, as well as numerous partnerships with international pharmaceutical industry players. Several projects stemming from this ecosystem have progressed to clinical development and generated revenues of several $1 million, which can then be reinvested in the research and development of new therapeutic solutions. These infrastructures also have another strategic value. Beyond innovation, they represent a national capacity that can be mobilized in times of crisis. Drug discovery and development platforms can be rapidly redirected to support the production of treatments, whether generic or essential products, in the event of supply chain disruptions or geopolitical tensions that we are seeing these days. Unfortunately, the federal CECR program was discontinued in 2018. IRIC, its drug discovery unit, and IRICOR managed to continue their activities thanks to their own revenues and various partnerships. However, the absence of structuring support, such as those provided by the CECR program, now limits their ability to grow and expand. I think it's important to recognize that therapeutic innovation and pharmaceutical production capacity are national security issues. In the current geopolitical context, and in view of the major changes taking place in our neighbors to the south, it is becoming essential for Canada to protect and strengthen its national capacity to discover, develop, and produce the medicines needed to treat its population. Integrated models, such as the one developed at IRIC, demonstrate that Canada already possesses the scientific expertise and infrastructure to play an important role in this field. With the right strategic support, these platforms could make an even more significant contribution to the country's pharmaceutical sovereignty. What's needed now is a strategic commitment to support and develop these national capabilities in the short, middle, medium, and long term. Thank you for your attention, and I look forward to your questions.
Mr. Summers, for 5 minutes.
Well, greetings from snowy North Vancouver today. I'm Dr. Julian Summers, and I work as a clinical psychologist and full professor. My primary area of expertise is addiction practices and policies, and for 40 years, I've designed and implemented innovations in harm reduction and recovery-oriented services and policies. My body of work includes large-scale reforms to public services in Canada's provinces and territories, and randomized controlled trials demonstrating how to effectively reduce crime, medical emergencies, and promote social reintegration among people who experience addictions and homelessness. I've also led multiple studies on pharmaceuticals addressing addiction and other forms of mental illness. I'm grateful for the opportunity to bring several points to the attention of this committee. In the past decade, Canada, including my home province of BC, has introduced addiction policies that were ill-advised, misrepresented, intentionally unevaluated, and that caused immense harm to citizens and communities. Canada was the only place in the world that prioritized dispensing an array of pharmaceuticals to people living in poverty with profound addictions, as effective forms of intervention were marginalized and even maligned. And it is of vital public importance to understand why. First, Canada differs from comparator nations, including the United States, by failing to require pharmaceutical companies to disclose the amounts they provide to clinicians, hospitals, activist groups, and universities, and how those funds are used. Canadian academic organizations that previously focused on things such as infectious diseases shifted their focus to addiction, backed by pharmaceutical partners. Second, senior public health leaders and senior public health and clinical leaders lobbied for the expanded use of pharmaceuticals while forming related companies that promoted, air quotes, safe supply. These apparent conflicts of interest involve people who held roles such as provincial health officer, deputy provincial health officer, senior researchers, and director of health research funding. In addition, venture capitalists such as the Safe Supply Streaming Company issued calls for early investors claiming that Canada was the leading edge, creating a roughly $360 billion expected market in pharmaceuticals for addiction. There is no way to explain Canada's pharma-first addiction strategy without considering the role of money. The influence of private capital is evident in the emergence of conflicts of interest, in the uses of tax dollars to fund industry-friendly research, and direct spending on pharmaceuticals with no hope of reasonably reducing mass addiction casualties. There was and remains no evidence indicating that pharmaceuticals were either safe or effective in promoting recovery from severe addiction. For several years, the harms of Canada's pharma-first addiction policies were denied by governments and those with vested interests, but over time, it became impossible to deny what was increasingly evident to more and more citizens, first responders, business owners, parents, and families. A large body of addiction science and practice was effectively displaced, with links extending back to the era of deinstitutionalization. I remember it well from my early days in the 1980s working at BC's Riverview Hospital. Canadians were promised a shift to community-based recovery-oriented systems of care for people experiencing addictions and other mental illnesses. And in 2007, a Canadian Senate committee led by Michael Kirby completed an exhaustive analysis that reinstated the urgent need to redouble our efforts toward that goal. The overwhelming majority of Canadians who've died in the past decade from drug poisoning were unemployed. In BC, where drugs have become the leading cause of death among youth, about 3/4 of those youth received services from our Ministry for Children and Family Development, which administers foster care. When physicians, lawyers, airline pilots, and public servants develop addictions, they are supported with intensive psychosocial interventions and are required to abstain from substance use, including pharmaceutical forms of addictive drugs. But in recent years, if an average Canadian citizen develops addiction, they receive no intensive psychosocial resources, regardless of whether they are unemployed or inadequately housed, and they are given the one thing that the previously mentioned groups are denied: drugs. It has been widely demonstrated that the same approach to addiction that works for physicians and others can be applied to assist people regardless of their circumstances. An important step toward that single standard of care in Canada would be to require that pharmaceutical companies disclose funds provided to researchers, clinicians, and other groups, and to ensure that public funds are applied to research and services that prioritize the goal of addiction prevention, social reintegration, and recovery. Those things are achievable, and I heartily encourage you to consider supporting that kind of course correction through the important work of your committee. Thank you.
Thank you. And now on to Mr. Keon. I believe you're speaking on behalf of your group.
Yes.
5 minutes.
Oui. Merci, Monsieur le Vice-Président.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Hello, and thank you for giving us the opportunity to share the perspectives of Canada's generic and biosimilar drug industries on Canada's pharmaceutical sovereignty. Generic and biosimilar drugs account for 80% of prescriptions dispensed to Canadian patients. These cost-effective products support the sustainability of drug budgets and create the financial space needed for drug plans to cover new and innovative therapies. Our member companies operate the vast majority of Canada's pharmaceutical manufacturing capacity with extensive facilities and a highly skilled workforce. Over the past 2 decades, price pressures and procurement policies that favor the lowest cost have gradually reduced the incentives for domestic production.
Now I'll speak English. Our perspective on pharmaceutical sovereignty. As a starting point, pharmaceutical sovereignty will require decision makers to recognize that cost-saving generic and biosimilar medicines are not just budget line items. They are strategic assets that must be treated as health, economic, and national security priorities. Pharmaceutical sovereignty is about protecting the health of Canadians through a reliable, secure, and sustainable domestic supply of medicines. It means ensuring that Canada has the domestic capacity and policy frameworks in place to reliably supply and produce essential medicines to meet the needs of Canadians. There are thousands of prescription medications sold in Canada today. While it would be impossible to make all these medicines here, there are important...
Excuse me, Mr. Keon. Just for a moment, I just noticed the camera's not on you. Is that just what we're seeing, or is that a problem? There we go. Perfect. Sorry about that. That's okay. Now you can continue on.
Thank you. There are thousands of prescription medications sold in Canada today. While it would be impossible to make all these medicines here, there are important opportunities to strengthen both Canada's domestic generic pharmaceutical manufacturing capacity and our strategic international pharmaceutical supply chains. However, there are market barriers. Pharmaceutical sovereignty will require decision makers to take action to address the significant existing barriers to market entry for generic and biosimilar medicines. This is needed to both ensure a robust pipeline of new generic and biosimilar medicines for Canadians and to support domestic generic drug manufacturers who want to grow their manufacturing and R&D capacity here in Canada. The lack of predictability and significant risk companies are facing in Canada today is unprecedented. It is extremely difficult for our member companies to plan and build a business case to make the investments needed to bring new cost-saving medicines to the Canadian market. For example, there are exceptionally long delays in Health Canada drug submission reviews. There are over 100 generic drug submissions in backlog. Some targets have been missed by years. There is also very low uptake of more complex generic products in Canada because drug plans have not put the right policy levers in place to support their widespread use. This urgently needs to be addressed as it represents most of the current product pipelines for generic drug manufacturers. Patents for new uses of older brand name drugs are now unfairly blocking generic and biosimilar market entry. That was not how Parliament had intended the intellectual property and regulatory system to work. Patent evergreening, product hopping, and other life cycle management strategies of originator companies are delaying and frustrating market entry. Any move to increase market exclusivity periods for originator drugs would harm Canada's pharmaceutical sovereignty. Domestic investment. In addition to addressing these existing barriers, Canada must create competitive conditions for companies to invest in manufacturing upgrades and expand capacity. This includes tax incentives, grants, loans, and modernized regulatory pathways with clear guidance. When governments send predictable long-term market signals, companies invest. Without those signals, capital flows elsewhere. Pharmaceutical sovereignty does not mean isolation. Canada will always be part of global supply chains. But sovereignty does mean having sufficient domestic capacity and trusted partners so Canadians are not at the back of the line when risks of supply chain shocks occur. Canada should secure supply chain security agreements with key trading partners, building on the lessons learned through the pandemic. In conclusion, Canada's pharmaceutical sovereignty must begin with generics and biosimilars, the products that meet most of Canadians' prescription drug needs. We have a strong foundation, but it cannot be taken for granted. By addressing current barriers, Canada can expand generic pharmaceutical manufacturing, strengthen supply chains, and ensure that Canadians have timely access to cost-saving generic and biosimilar medicines. Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Keon. And now from the Canadian Pharmaceutical Manufacturers and Exporters Alliance, Mr. Creighton.
It's Mrs.
Ms. Creighton, sorry.
That's okay. Okay. Mr. Vice Chair and members of the Standing Committee, I want to thank the committee for investigating Canadian pharmaceutical sovereignty. This is a topic that is near and dear to our organization. Strong domestic drug manufacturing is necessary for Canada to secure its own pharmaceutical sovereignty. The Canadian Pharmaceutical Manufacturers and Exporters Alliance is a coalition of generic and contract manufacturing pharmaceutical companies with manufacturing facilities based here in Canada. Our members are the largest producers of medicines in Canada and collectively represent more than 30% of all prescriptions dispensed in Canada, making essential prescription medicines used by patients and in hospitals every day right across the country. In the past, Canada had a significant number of companies producing medicines for Canadians and for export. Sadly, domestic production has declined over the last 2 decades, and we have become overly dependent on imported medicines, mostly from India and China. The loss of local drug manufacturing is a cause for concern, especially during this time of increasing geopolitical tensions. If Canadians cannot depend on domestic drug production to meet our needs, we are facing a looming national security and public health crisis. Most of the pharmaceutical production that still takes place in Canada is generics and contract manufacturing, without which we would be even more vulnerable. Other countries, most notably the U.S. and the European Union, are taking aggressive steps to reshore production, offering attractive regulatory and industrial policies aimed at supporting their domestic producers and luring others to relocate. We are still waiting for the results of the U.S. Section 232 investigation into trade in pharmaceuticals, which is imminent and is expected to include tariffs or other measures to further encourage reshoring of medicine production in the U.S. Canada has the same opportunity to secure its pharmaceutical sovereignty, and that's why we're here today. And we have some specific solutions that we would like to share. First of all, we're very encouraged that this government has recognized that biomanufacturing is a strategic sector. The Buy Canadian policy has committed to direct federal purchases to Canadian suppliers. Why not medicines too? And the recent National Defence Industrial Strategy promises investment in medical countermeasures and stockpiling. However, this recognition must translate to concrete policies that strengthen domestic pharmaceutical manufacturing. The CPMEA has developed a 5-point action plan for Canadian domestic pharmaceutical production that I encourage you to review in your deliberations. The first action is to prioritize the regulatory review of submissions from Canadian producers by Health Canada. We recommend a priority pathway for new generic drug applications submitted by Canadian manufacturers. As it stands now, There is no distinction between applications submitted by Canadian producers and those submitted by importers, even though domestic producers invest significantly in Canadian clinical development, workforces, and production facilities. Health Canada is currently consulting on the Reliance program, which is intended to speed up approvals by relying on authorizations from foreign regulatory agencies. We are concerned that this process will inadvertently harm domestic producers by giving priority to importers' submissions and push submissions from Canadian producers to the back of the line. Those unintended consequences would seriously undermine Canada's goal of greater pharmaceutical sovereignty. Our next recommendation recognizes that drug production is a very capital-intensive industry. Canada must maintain our industrial competitiveness and provide matching tax and economic policies to compete against the benefits that are being offered elsewhere, and to recognize that it costs more to produce drugs here in Canada than it does in countries like India and China, where labor costs are so much lower. Thirdly, and I can't believe I'm saying this, but access to pharmaceuticals can be weaponized and supply intentionally disrupted as a war measure, in addition to shipping disruptions caused by conflict. The blockade of the Straits of Hormuz, where ships from India pass, is an immediate cause for vigilance. We recommend the Department of Defense treat domestic pharmaceutical producers as critical infrastructure within homeland defense planning. Mechanisms such as reservation contracts and dual-use technologies should be explored with Canadian producers. The next pillar builds on Canada First procurement by directing even a portion of public grant expenditures to medicines made by Canadian producers. Governments, federal and provincial, can reduce dependence on imported medicines without incurring any additional costs. Finally, we recognize we cannot make everything we need, and we must have global partners, as others have said. Canadians are very good at making medicines, and we are ready to expand our facilities, invest in new technologies, and work to defend Canada's pharmaceutical sovereignty. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And our last presenter, Innovative Medicines Canada, Bettina Hamlin. Welcome.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon, committee members. Bettina Hamlin, President and CEO of Innovative Medicines Canada. Your study on Canada's pharmaceutical sovereignty comes at a pivotal moment for Canada's life sciences sector, our national security, and for Canadians. Canada's access to new medicines is increasingly at risk. Recent global developments, including the introduction of the most favored nation drug pricing in the United States, is already disrupting access to existing medicines, delaying or halting the launch of new medicines, and undermining confidence in Canada's pharmaceutical market. For Canadians waiting for a new cancer therapy or a rare disease treatment, these aren't abstract policy debates. They have real consequences for patients and families. The U.S. administration has argued that global pharmaceutical pricing needs to be rebalanced, and recent policy changes reflect that view. These developments are contributing to a broader global reset in how medicines are priced and valued, and they will have implications for markets like Canada. Canada must respond strategically and think creatively to ensure our system is resilient, globally competitive, and safeguards the dual-use biomanufacturing capacity that underpins our health security and defense readiness. For too long, Canada has undervalued and underinvested in pharmaceutical innovation. We have world-class research institutions and a strong regulatory system, yet we lag peers in ensuring timely access to new medicines. Canada faces a clear choice: wait and hope global changes spare us, or act now to strengthen our pharmaceutical sovereignty so that Canada remains a competitive market for innovative medicines and a reliable partner in the global life sciences ecosystem. Inaction carries risk. A less competitive market leads to delayed launches, fewer clinical trials, and decreased investment. This affects not only patient access, it also affects our economic security. IMC member companies have made significant investments in Canada's life sciences sector. Sanofi's $800 million state-of-the-art vaccine manufacturing facility, AstraZeneca's $820 million expansion into a global clinical research hub, Roche Canada's $130 million global informatics hub expansion, and Merck's digital science studio helping Canadian startups harness AI. These are just a few examples, and the list goes on. These are votes of confidence in Canada. They create high-value jobs, strengthen our health security through global partnerships, and bring advanced manufacturing capacity to our economy. And we need policies that keep them coming. The impact of innovative medicines on health system sustainability is compelling. A 2025 study by Dr. Frank Lichtenberg at Columbia University shows sustained investments in innovative medicines reduced hospitalizations in Canada by 55% in 2022, saving close to $80 billion. Lichtenberg also found that pharmaceutical innovations between 2002 and 2022 reduced premature mortality by 49% compared to a scenario without those drugs. Other countries are actively strengthening their life sciences strategies and investment environments. Canada must do the same. The UK has already reached a bilateral agreement with the US. Now is the time for Canada to act with clarity, with purpose, and with a plan that protects patients, supports innovation, and strengthens our partnerships. Canadians are counting on it and deserve nothing less. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. So that summarizes the side of testimony. So now we'll get into asking questions, and to kick off the first round, it'll be the Conservatives, and that'll be me. I'm in the chair today, which is a little bit different, but we'll away we go here. So for Mr. Watson, you are here today representing Apotex, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Mr. Watson, I have a copy here of the public settlement agreement from opioid litigation in the United States involving Apotex Corp. It's it right here. According to the settlement, Apotex agreed to pay over $72 million to resolve opioid-related claims brought by the U.S. states. And so, just so we're clear with the committee, Apotex Corp referenced in this settlement is part of the same Apotex corporate group that you are representing today. Is that correct?
Yes, it's a U.S. subsidiary.
That is correct.
That's correct.
And Mr. Watson, I also have here the original lawsuit filed by the province of British Columbia against opioid manufacturers seeking to recover health care costs related to the opioid crisis. In this lawsuit, Apotex is listed as a defendant. That is the same Apotex that you are representing today. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Mr. Watson, Apotex manufactures opioid medications, including hydromorphone, correct?
Correct.
Are you aware that hydromorphone is one of the most prescribed drugs in the safe supply programs across Canada? Yes or no?
I'm aware it's a well prescribed product. To indicate whether it's the most prescribed, I wouldn't know.
You don't know?
I would know that it is a actively prescribed product.
Those programs are designed to address addiction. Given that your company
Point of order, Mr. Chair. And I don't know who takes the point of order because you're asking questions as chair. You should have handed the chair over.
It's not a point of order.
No.
What standing order are you referring to?
What
standing order are you referring to?
Relevance, sir. You're asking questions that have nothing to do with pharmaceutical sovereignty. So I'd ask someone other than yourself to rule on the point of order and to bring your questions in line with the point of this study.
Duly noted.
You can't rule on it as chair.
You're out of order. Yes, I can. Those programs are designed to address addiction. Given that your company manufactures this drug, does Apotex have any scientific evidence showing that hydromorphone is an effective treatment for addiction?
I'm not in a position to speak to that, and Mr. Vice Chair, I'd be happy to take any questions from the committee and respond back to your question.
Yeah, that'd be great. If you could table those documents, that'd be very helpful. Dr. Summers, it is my understanding that Mark Tyndall served as Deputy Public Health Officer under the provincial BC government until 2018. Is that correct?
Sounds about right to the best of my knowledge, yes.
After leaving the government, Mark Tyndall launched a vending machine company called MySafe, which dispensed opioids to drug users. What can you tell us about this vending machine company?
Well, I can confirm that I've seen the machines in action. And at the time that they were being developed at sort of the concept stage, I suggested that there were much more effective priorities. And in fact, that taking the step of responding to people who are living in poverty. So it's important to note that these machines were installed in what are referred to as low barrier housing developments. And from prior research, one of the things that was most urgently needed among people who were socially estranged, including those in low barrier housing, was the opportunity to be engaged in meaningful relationships and on a path to social reintegration, which, by the way, is something that harm reduction interventions are capable of initiating. I thought that it was exactly the wrong type of message to take as we were in the first year of a declared public health emergency, to be rather than engaging alienated people interpersonally, that we would instead be pouring our energies and attentions into an interface that involved a machine. But that, my view, was fairly forcefully outvoted by people in positions of authority.
Yeah, and I have some follow-up questions on that as well. So according to Health Canada's website, the federal government gave this company over $3.5 million. Is this correct?
I've seen that, and also an additional tranche of funds as well. So I think that's sort of a low estimate of what we've invested collectively.
Okay, Dr. Summers, did Mark Tyndall advocate for policies like decriminalization and safe supply in his former role within the government? Yes or no?
Yes, he did.
How is this not financial conflict of interest?
You're asking me.
Point of order, Chair. Point
Yes.
of order. Just wondering what is the relevance, because we're just starting out on the study on pharmaceutical sovereignty, and the line of questioning hasn't really been even close to the intent of the study.
I guess when we're done all my questions, you'll get it very clear. So. We're ready to go again? Dr. Summers, it is also my understanding that Perry Kendall served as the public health officer in the provincial BC government until 2018. Is this correct?
It's either 2017 or 2018, yes.
After leaving the government, Perry Kendall co-founded a company called Fair Price Pharma, which distributed injectable heroin. Is this correct?
Point of order, Chair. It's the study we're focused on, and to this point, I have not heard a relevant question to the study, the intent of the study.
Okay.
I'll answer. Yes, Dr. Kendall co-founded a company that was positioned to distribute heroin, diacetylmorphine.
Okay. Is it fair to say that both former government officials advocated for policies like decriminalization and safe supply in their former roles? Yes or no?
Yes. Yes.
Thank you very much. And that's the end of my time.
First of all, thank you to all the witnesses that are here today as we start this very important study to discuss the topic as we look at the landscape of our, pharmaceutical sovereignty, like all the things that we're trying to do to a lot of witnesses' point to have the security and sovereignty of our medical system. And I in a lot of readings and I think through a lot of the notes we've seen that Canada relies heavily on foreign imports, on APIs, on a lot of the drugs. And I think my question is to either Jim or Jeff to let us know about the dependence and what this means in practical terms for Canada's pharmaceutical sovereignty, and specifically some of the challenges that you've seen, but some of the opportunities that you also see as well.
All right, thank you for the question. Yes, I think it is true that Canada relies heavily on foreign imports of active pharmaceutical ingredients as well as final dosage products. And we commissioned a study a couple of years ago that showed that the percentage of products made in Canada has been declining. And our solution to that is to try to make Canada as an attractive a place for investment in generic and biosimilar medicines as possible. I think some of the framework policies that we've mentioned today are very important. Health Canada, we're very concerned about Health Canada. Health Canada lacks resources. They're not able to review and approve medicines in any kind of predictable way. Companies that want to invest in Canada have no idea right now when their products are going to be approved. So we are making a strong campaign to encourage Health Canada to get the resources necessary to have the ability to approve products so that Canada can be seen as a leader in pharmaceutical regulatory approvals. The other thing that has happened is there's been a race to the bottom in terms of pricing, both at the hospital level and at the retail level. And I think, when you're looking to support investment, and Jeff can speak to Apotex, when you're looking to support investment, you need to have sustainable pricing. And we are working with our partners at the provincial level through the Pan-Canadian Pharmaceutical Alliance to try and get sustainable pricing that would support more domestic production. So those would be two things right off that I think we could do to improve the situation.
Yeah, I think what I would add is as you build out the pharmaceutical supply chain, I think we don't probably speak enough as an industry about building out capability in market. So as you develop API resources in market domestically, you also develop broader international supply chains. So you end up having sourcing hubs around the world globally. And as you build that expertise, you are able to utilize, that global network. It's a complicated supply chain. You're not going to fix it overnight. But what you can do through investment is start to build in-market resourcing, which then strengthens the supply chain, as I mentioned, globally. So important to have those resources here domestically, the scientific staff, et cetera, engineering that's required in this side of the industry.
Right. Oh, yeah, Terry, if you could add. Yeah.
Because this is a national security vulnerability, as you've pointed out, but it's something that other countries are looking at too. In fact, most of our allies are looking at this as well, and how there can be integrated supply chains where we support each other's API production. There are API producers in Canada. Apotex is an API producer. There's a company called Minichem in Montreal, or in Quebec, is Canada's largest API producer. So we can support our own API producers to begin with. There are many sources of API production in Europe. And as I understand, there are discussions taking place between the Mexican government and the U.S. as part of their bilateral agreements. Because the Mexican industry is building out their API production. So it's not something just for Canada to consider, and we should be discussing this probably as part of our trade talks with Mexico as well as the United States, how we can support each other through API sharing.
So, thank you. Yeah, and sort of with the understanding that it is a very integrated supply chain, and there's obviously it's not going to happen overnight. Just wanted to, also get your take on, maybe what you see as challenges, also opportunities to build our own domestic manufacturing capacity, and what do you see sort of like the way forward here?
Okay. Well, we would like to see the policy environment as attractive as possible for generic and biosimilar manufacturing. We think that having the right regulatory system, sustainable pricing, fair intellectual property laws is the basis for all investment. Companies need to have a stable, predictable, sustainable market. We don't have that right now in Canada. We've proposed a number of measures that would improve that. I think I also said in my remarks, we're never going to make all of the medicines necessary. There are thousands of medicines sold in Canada for Canadian patients. We can't make them all. We need to have secure arrangements with other partners, and we would certainly support Canada entering into supply commitments with other countries and supply agreements to ensure the free flow of pharmaceuticals.
I think that's my time. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Mr. Blanchet-Joncas, 6 minutes.
Monsieur le Président, je salue les témoins qui sont.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to thank our witnesses for being with us today. First question to Mr. Bouvier. We have amazing researchers and biomedical facilities, mainly created by our universities, but these innovations are developed and commercialized elsewhere, unfortunately. What are some of the obstacles in front of Canada in terms of building or coming up with a drug that's tested clinically and produced here? Thank you for your question. I think there are a number of obstacles limiting the capacity to take things to their logical conclusion with regard to discovering medicines here. I can give you a couple examples. The first is the capacity of raising sufficient capital to make sure that these discoveries can be done here in Canada with Canadian players. Often, the discoveries are either licensed directly internationally. It could also be a source of income and accelerating things, but that's not the only source. We need to also be able to keep this capacity here in the country to innovate and transform innovations into commercial products. So capital often is what lacks in Canada to establish companies that can go in depth and take the development to its final point. And when these companies are created, they are often sold to foreign interests, again, as a result of a lack of capital here in Canada that would support these companies. Another limitation is, as mentioned by our colleagues, are the challenges of assessing and getting approvals for medicines here in Canada. There are many examples. For instance, colleagues from University of Montreal developed medicines for a very rare disease, and this medicine was approved for reimbursement in Europe, in the United States, but to this day still not approved in Canada. So these are obstacles that are in our way, if you will, when it comes to developing medicines and commercializing these. Thank you, Dr. Bouvier. Now, when it comes to research, intellectual property coming out of the universities, is it captured sufficiently in Canada, or is it often used and put to use elsewhere? Well, it's a complex question because part of the intellectual property is captured and put to good use here when the necessary structures are in place in conjunction with the universities and when they are able to transfer the knowledge. So it's possible to get external licenses done, but there needs to be fair revenue sharing as well to feed into Canadian institutes. But unfortunately, these sorts of structures are not very commonplace, as they should be in Canada. So that's the vision that the federal government had when they created the CECR, to give Canadian universities and high-level research institutes the structure that would allow them to go further when they make discoveries, because these universities don't always end up with a product or medicine. There are so many stages in this valley of death, if you will. So one needs to have the means to take the whole process to its final point of commercializing a product, and they either need help to get companies started here in Canada, or to get licenses with international companies, but by making sure that the terms of these licenses allow for fair sharing of the value generated. And unfortunately, Canadian universities aren't very well equipped to get these agreements done, or these two components of the equation. Thank you. Dr. Bouvier, you referred to the CECR program that supports different institutes, but this program was discontinued in 2018, you said. What was the concrete impact of the discontinuation of this program on Canada's capacity of developing medication, starting from university research? Well, there was a local impact for IRIC and IRICOR. We had to concentrate on a limited number of projects. So it put a cap, if you will, to the revenue we could generate. And this wasn't the only CECR structure that existed in Canada. There were others with national impact. They also had to reduce their activities or were not able to expand. So this had a significant impact with regard to coming up with new medicines, but also in terms of the innovation that you need to produce the medicines in question. Synthesis, for instance, or the new biological techniques that you need. And when you don't have the support for such innovation here, then you will inevitably have difficulty producing the products in the life sciences and biopharmaceuticals industry here. So the program, unfortunately, was lost to the valley of death, as it's often referred to. Well, yeah, the decision to discontinue was not based on the performance of the program, but rather on a new vision of things, of how Canada is supposed to invest in the research and these big initiatives.
Round, so now we'll go into the 5-minute rounds, and Ms. Conance.
Thank you. My question is for Mr. Watson. Can you confirm that Apotex is involved in the production of the opioid apohydromorphone? And have you had any contracts for apohydromorphone with the federal government in the last decade?
I can't confirm on the contract with the federal government, but be happy to provide that information to you.
If you could table that for the committee, that would be great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Watson, as I'm sure you're aware, my province of British Columbia has seen enormous damage to human health because of the opioid addiction.
Point of order, Chair.
You've asked us to trust you and include you in the Buy Canada policy.
Sorry, Ms. Cozant. We have a point of order.
So once again, members of the committee
What's
are
the standing
asking
order?
questions that are completely irrelevant to the issue at hand on pharmaceutical sovereignty.
We're just starting.
I would ask you to ask members to please make their questions relevant to the study that we are here to discuss.
I think everyone around here would agree that the manufacturing of opioids is part of pharmaceutical sovereignty. So I will continue. So you've asked us, Mr. Watson, to trust you and include you in the Buy Canada policy. But it's widely agreed upon that this crisis began with the oversupply of prescription opioids dating back to the 1990s. It has obviously cost many, many lives and tragedy. Will Apotex take responsibility and agree to a settlement with my province of BC to provide compensation for these harms?
Point of order.
I can.
Mr. Watson.
Sorry, I'm just point of ordering here. Yeah. Again, I'm struggling to see the relevance of the line of questioning here. I think the member may have even referred to a lawsuit. It will be, I would request the chair to ask members to, stay on topic, and we're doing a study here that's relevant, and to ask questions relevant to the study. Thank you.
I can imagine why members around this table might get upset by this line of questioning, because it is a very upsetting subject. And in order to understand whether we can trust the companies and the representatives that want us to buy Canadian, we need to find out whether they're going to, well, they are trustworthy. So one of the things I'm asking about is the class action that was brought by my province of BC that you've been opposing in court for 7 years now, even all the way to the BC Supreme Court. So I guess my question is, you want Canadians to support your efforts in domestic drug making here today. You want us to trust you, and Canadians obviously would like to trust you, but you won't take accountability for these past failings. Can you speak to this?
Provide an answer to that and provide some context to that. I'm the president of the Canadian Generic Pharmaceutical Association, representing all companies,
Sorry, Mr. Keon, but
including
I did
Apotex.
ask Mr. Watson this question, and I just
I
wanted
do
to know
represent
whether he
Apotex
could
and
answer that.
all generic companies.
Are you representing Mr. Watson? I'm sorry, I didn't realize that. I'm sure you'll have questions I was just going to ask Mr. Watson, because he is the one who spoke to us about.
I was just going to provide some context.
But the question was, just
yeah,
as chair's
I'm sorry.
prerogative, the question was for Mr. Watson.
Thank you.
If Mr. Watson decides to hand it over to you, then that's the way it'll work.
Okay, so I'm not in position to talk about part of your question. I will tell you that we do recognize the tragic circumstances that these products have caused Canadians, but also as a generic company and part of a generic association. Just as a reminder, we do not promote generic products to physicians, and we don't sell products to physicians or promote products to patients. We sell our products to pharmacists and through a wholesale chain. And I will defer to Jim.
Wait, I will follow up with another question. So we know that in the United States, Apotex agreed under the National Multi-State Opioid Settlement to a compensation package of $72 million. So I want to understand why your company, Apotex, is willing to compensate Americans, but why won't you end this legal battle in Canada here and compensate British Columbians? It's a really important question, I'm sure, for everybody who's watching online and in this room today.
Once again, we recognize the importance of this. We are working productively as we have, and I'm not in a position, nor will I be commenting on any ongoing matters.
Okay, further to that, I understand that it's a difficult subject, but you've been working on this for 7 years. And in order for Canadians to trust your company, trust you, we need to understand why they aren't being compensated for the destruction of these drugs. In British Columbia, where I represent, and throughout Canada.
Yeah, once again, it's an ongoing matter.
Okay. Well, my final question on this is, as CEO of Apotex, do you take any responsibility for the Canadians who have lost their lives and have been ruined by the opioid addiction?
As the CEO of Apotex, we take the importance and the maintenance and the impacts of these drugs extremely seriously. But once again, Apotex, like other generic companies, we sell our products to pharmacies. We do not promote our products. We fulfill existing demand in the marketplace, but we do take this topic extremely seriously.
I'm glad to hear that, because I know that you did have a settlement with Quebec, so I'm wondering why this company cannot settle with BC, and it's been 7 years. Thank you.
Ms. Jazik.
Thank you so much, Chair. And just to reorient the discussion and to remind all our witnesses, in fact, the study is to develop recommendations on how Canada can best promote pharmaceutical sovereignty. So to return to that subject, my first question is for Mr. Keon. Canada is responsible for direct health services for the armed forces, for Indigenous populations. Would you recommend perhaps that Canada look directly at Canadian manufacturers in terms of procurement for their pharmaceutical requirements for those particular responsibilities that the government has?
I think they should look to Canadian suppliers, absolutely. I think the procurement process should also look for reliability, sustainability, good cost, good value. So all of those things should be part of the contracts, yes.
Ms. Creighton, would you like to comment on possible procurement practices?
In fact, procurement policies are one of the 5 action plans that we have put together, and we have thought about this a lot. And we think there is great opportunity in Canada to support domestic producers through procurement. Between the federal and the provincial governments, governments in Canada spend over $18 billion a year reimbursing eligible Canadians under drug plans. As it stands today, none of that is directed to support Canadian producers. And yet the federal government has adopted, or is in the midst of adopting, Buy Canadian policy, which we certainly support. And one of the components of that is to direct federal purchases to Canadian suppliers. We are strongly in favor for that to include medicines, and through the programs that you mentioned, there is an opportunity through formulary management, even direct even a portion of those current expenditures to give preference to Canadian-made medicines. And the most important part of that is it would not cost any additional money because those expenditures are already being made, and this would be a matter, in the case of generics, to direct some of that to the companies that are here in Canada, have invested in Canada, are making these medicines in Canada, and incurring the cost to do so as a way to support Canadian producers.
Thank you. In fact, Ms. Creighton, I think you made some comments, concerns about our new government's initiatives in terms of regulating Health Canada, trying to modernize the whole regulatory process and speed it up, of course, and moving towards greater international collaboration and reliance, including the ability to rely on assessments by foreign regulators while maintaining Canadian standards for safety, effectiveness, and quality. Could you just expand a little bit on how this, you viewed this with some trepidation? Could you elaborate on why you, or how you think this might be improved?
Okay, thank you. The Reliance program is in the midst of consultation. It is a program that is intended to speed up approvals of submissions to Health Canada for sponsors, drug companies, to rely on the approval that they have received from other foreign regulatory authorities, such as the FDA in the U.S. or the European Medicines Association in Europe. What we're concerned about, and the intention of it is to speed up approvals. So logically you have to believe that those applications that are received by Health Canada will get priority review. I mean, that's the whole point, is to speed it up. We are very concerned that, as Jim pointed out, there are already tremendous delays in approving submissions for generic products from Canadian companies as well. And we're very concerned that Canadian submissions will inadvertently go to the end of the line. We know this is certainly not the intention of the Reliance program. That is, it is an unintended consequence that we have brought to Health Canada's attention. But it's very concerning to us if it delays the approval of Canadian products, and in the case of generics, we compete against those imported products, and that they would gain access to the Canadian market faster, and that our products would stay in the same queue that it currently exists, which is not being addressed and is not being improved. And so we will be subject to the current pathway as opposed to this expedited pathway. So we have recommended, in addition to the Reliance program, that Health Canada consider a priority pathway for submissions from Canadian companies and to speed up those approvals in a different way.
Thank you, Ms. Creighton. Mr. Blanchette-Jonquez for 6 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Je poursuis vers Dr. Bouvier.
Thank you, Chair. I'll continue with Dr. Bouvier. This year, the federal government announced a significant reduction in the innovation program at colleges and communities. What do you think the impact will be in terms of Canada's capacity to build a solid pharmaceutical ecosystem? Well, predictability is an important factor in all this. One of the main challenges over the years has been the difficulty of knowing whether a program will be supported and maintained for years to come, allowing for partnerships with other academic partners or industry partners from the industry, so that these things are stable and long-lasting for our research. That's an important point. Now, when it comes to the cuts in training programs at college or university levels, will have a significant impact on our capacity of training the next generation of innovators in pharmaceutical field, but other fields as well. In life sciences, there's a significant shortage. We need to train these people here so that they contribute here to the next big discovery or innovation. If the current climate is not favorable to this training, then people will choose to go either abroad or they will choose a different path for their careers, which will put a cap on our innovation capacity. Did you hear from research centers that had to reduce their capacity or even close when the CECR program was terminated? Well, reduce their activities, yes, a lot of them have done that. In our case, ERIC and ERICOR continue to work and have success stories, but our capacity of investing in new projects has been significantly reduced. So these innovations will not see the light of day, or at least quickly, because due to a lack of investment. The same applies to other CECRs, other centers, who also had to reduce significantly their activities. For instance, there's one in Montreal, formerly known as NeoMed. They had to reduce their activities quite a bit with regard to the development of new research programs. They had to focus on a limited number of sectors, but they're not really doing development anymore. The national capacity of discovering and developing medicines, do you think, is it key to having true pharmaceutical sovereignty? Yes, it's essential in my opinion. The capacity to innovate makes it possible to use what you come up with. When an organization or a country stops innovating, it also caps their capacity of integrating new innovations, even though they take it from somewhere else. And you will have to import these innovations, and you're no longer able to contribute to these while you're at the mercy of different crises in public health, or if there are significant geopolitical changes as the ones we are witnessing these days. So in my opinion, it's essential to have a biopharmaceutical sector that is solid, based here in Canada, if you want to have collaboration with international organizations in this field. These have been very important for us. It accelerates drug development. Once you have these structures in place, you get the benefit out of them, and you keep the wheel turning. If we were to have another global health crisis, of course we don't wish such a thing, but do you think Canada will have the capacity of developing and producing new treatments, or would we still be dependent to a large extent on international sources? Unfortunately, we still would be largely dependent on international sources. There have been some improvements, but in my opinion, the challenge here is to target very particular sectors. Of course, it's very hard to predict what the next big problem we will run into will be. Viruses and bacteria are real problems, of course, but we could encounter something else. So it takes innovation and knowledge, a wide base, to strengthen our capacity. Of course, you need the infrastructure to turn things over. You need to be agile, which I referred to in my opening remarks. You need to have a high-performing system in place so that you can reorient in line with needs. If you lose these infrastructures, if you don't have a solid basis, then you will inevitably run into a great deal of trouble once the next big thing hits. Well, to recap, if you were to give us some key recommendations for the government to strengthen pharmaceutical sovereignty, what would be these key recommendations? Well, I would say invest in innovation and research infrastructure, which already exists, which already function well. They work well, but they need to be strengthened. So you need to encourage the development of these infrastructures locally. That's important. And you need to, because we seem to think that this could be done globally with superstructures that are massive, but unfortunately, research and innovation, it's a contact sport, and it really pays to be in close proximity to the people who are doing these discoveries and who are putting in the work so that there is a certain degree of confidence that this is agile and reliable. So these two key elements are very important. Thank you very much.
5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, everyone, for coming to committee today. Really interesting testimony. Mr. Watson, I hope you understand the Conservative line of questioning to be in good faith, and I hope you've been reassured prior to coming that you benefit from parliamentary privilege while you're here, that nothing you say at this table can be held against you or your company in a court or any other proceeding. Have you been briefed that way?
No, but I appreciate your comment.
Okay. Point of order, Chair. Point of order, Chair.
Sorry.
Could the clerk confirm to the witnesses here that they benefit from parliamentary privilege, and could they brief future witnesses at the committee about the benefits thereof?
What did you just, sorry.
Well, it's just notable to me that the witnesses here today haven't been briefed about parliamentary privilege and that they're able to speak with immunity here, and I'm wondering if the clerk could confirm to them now that they benefit from that immunity, and if future witnesses to the committee could be reminded of that.
Do they have parliamentary immunity while they're testifying in committee? That is confirmation of yes.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted you to be reassured by that. Part of what intrigues me about, Mr. Watson, about pharmaceutical sovereignty is the opportunity for a higher level of trust and safety by Canadian drugs made for Canadians by Canadian manufacturers. Would you agree with me? I see a lot of heads nodding on the panel that would be an important part of pharmaceutical sovereignty, the opportunity for higher trust and safety standards. Okay, thank you. Dr. Summers, this question is still for you, Mr. Watson, but Dr. Summers made this claim, I suppose, that in Canada, and that it might be different in other countries, drug manufacturers don't have to disclose the amount of opioids or other potentially addictive drugs that are given to any particular provider or in any particular situation. Is that your understanding of the regulations? Like if a safe supply provider is asking for a bunch of your meds, do you take an interest in that? Does it have to be reported anywhere?
I'm not in a position to talk about a safe provider, but I can tell you once again, on the generic side of the business, we would ship to either pharmacies or to wholesalers. And if it was a wholesaler, we would have to track the amount. So we would be able to track the units sold to a unit pharmacy. The products, we're not involved in any way of the promotion of the products.
Gotcha. But do you have, so you do, I guess, track the amounts? Do you have to report the amounts to any sort of government agency?
I'm not. We have other, I'm not aware of reporting.
Okay, thank you. And then would you say in general that as a Canadian manufacturer that you take an interest in how your drugs are used? So if you became aware, I mean, so basically, what's interesting here is we have Dr. Summers saying there is not good evidence for using hydromorphone in safe supply and not good evidence for using hydromorphone in general as a treatment for opioid use disorder. Is that of interest to your company? Like if providers are using your drugs in a way for which there's not good evidence, is there any way that your company feeds that back to either the government or yourself or what?
I think once again, we're not in a position to have a relationship with the providers. So we do not have relationships with prescribers, with providers. So are we interested in terms of the general category of pain management and the fact that we participate in that to ensure that there's a safe supply of product in the marketplace? Yes. So do we have an awareness of the product? Yes. But do we have a kind of frontline, ongoing knowledge of emerging information on the product? We might not have that as other parts of industry might be exposed to that information.
I see. Would you be interested in taking an interest in that? I'm asking you on, in good faith, with parliamentary privilege, could your company, as part of a pharmaceutical sovereignty strategy, take an interest in making sure these drugs are not misused in Canada?
Of course.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Summers, I was excited that you came to speak to us today. You said a number of very interesting things. The first thing I'll ask you is, did I have that right? Did I get your comments correct when I put them to Mr. Watson, that Canada is a bit peculiar and that the reporting requirements for opioid manufacturers are different than in other jurisdictions, to your knowledge?
Thank you. The key point I made was not related to volumes of drugs and that tracking, but rather the fact that providing funding, direct funding to universities, to clinicians, to researchers is disclosed only on a voluntary basis. And so a fraction of the money that is allocated by pharmaceutical companies in Canada for those purposes.
I'm sorry if I misrepresented your comments then, and I'll just put those back to Mr. Watson. So does Apotex give money to universities for research in the way that Dr. Summers is describing, and is that not tracked or declared?
Once again, we're a generic pharmaceutical company. We don't fund research. Whether we have any relationships related to a generic portfolio, I'm not aware of that, but we are not, not that I'm aware.
Thank you. Is that time? Dr. Summers, I read in the news about you being ordered to destroy your research data by the BC government. Is that true? And is that even legal for them to ask you that?
It's an extraordinary step, and yes, that was correct. We had some over 20 years of research data collected over pharmaceutical trials, randomized trials, other studies involving addiction drug treatment court, a whole variety of interventions designed with collaborators around the world. 1 week after the BC government learned that we had those data and were mobilizing to evaluate their current drug policies, we received a letter ordering us to destroy everything and effectively undermining our ability to do that work that had already been funded and approved.
Okay, thank you very much.
Could I shoehorn a clarification in? I wanted to address that my understanding, I had to think about this term sovereignty before appearing here today. My understanding is that the committee's interest is both in the meaning of the term sovereignty as it relates to internal autonomy and agency, as well as security of freedom from external actors and threats, and that meaning of sovereignty. And from my perspective, knowing that Canada is...
If you want to, sorry about that, we do have time limitations here. If you want to submit a paper on that, though, please, by all means, submit that to the committee, and we'll take those comments.
I've made my point. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Ms. Sidhu.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, all the witnesses. My questions to Mr. Watson. Mr. Watson, if the federal government were to adopt a national strategy of pharmaceutical sovereignty, what 3 priorities do you believe should be at the center of ensure Canadians have reliable, affordable access to essential medicine? You already talked about sustainable pricing, but 3 priorities, if you can speak to that.
Yes. So first of all, we do have a backlog of products waiting for approval, and I would say bringing new products to market sooner. And by the way, a couple of years ago, 3 years ago maybe, I think Canada, or in Health Canada, was leading the way on time to market and approvals, to the point where you had regulators like the FDA trying to understand what were some of the key processes that Health Canada was using. So this is something that the country definitely knows how to do and has done. So I think unleashing that backlog, which would once again continue to bring more innovation from the generic side into the market, and all of a sudden continue to kind of offer more affordable medicines out to the marketplace. The second thing would be to prioritize Canadian local manufacturers and find ways to incentivize local manufacturers to continue to continue to invest in Canada, continue to bring products here in Canada and manufactured in Canada, and be given credit for domestic manufacturing for those products.
Thank you. To follow up that from an industry perspective, what types of tax incentives, such as tax credits or regulatory reforms or direct investments, would most effectively encourage companies to expand pharmaceutical manufacture in Canada?
I can defer to Terry as well, but I'll be happy to comment after Terry from a company perspective.
Yeah, we've looked at this quite closely, and we have developed a list of tax incentives and depreciation incentives that we have submitted to the Department of Finance as part of our budget submission, which I think you will be receiving as part of this deliberation. These are things like a refundable tax credit for manufacturing of medicines in Canada. I think the premise here is that we are suggesting that pharmaceutical production be treated as a critical industry, similar to other critical industries that receive tax and favorable economic support from the federal government as part of a broader strategy, because it's something that's desirable in Canada. We should support it. We have also recommended that the depreciation allowance for equipment be increased. We have recommended that the tax deductibility for investments not be capped. And we've also recommended that there was in the past a tax credit given to drug companies for donating medicines for charitable purposes. That tax credit was removed a few years ago, and we think that should be restored.
Just want a clarification. I know when I'm hearing here Health Canada, when approval of any drug, they do in 180 days. I think there's a major delays in approval after that, after Health Canada's approval. There's more, I think there's more procedure on that, but Health Canada's record is, to approval of any new drug is 180 days, which is...
That is the target, but it's rarely met. And I think that's what my colleague Jim was referring to in particular, that although there are targets and there's a process in place that are covered by the user fees that drug companies submit to Health Canada, there is a mechanism which enables the Health Canada to send it back the 179th day. And that's the concern we have, is that they are not reaching their own milestones.
And I think the failure to reach their milestones costs Canadians and the healthcare system substantially. Generic medicines come on the market at much lower pricing, and so when they're delayed, the programs have to pay the higher brand prices for longer. The other thing it does, a company invests in developing the product, they do the formulations, they do the studies, the clinical trials, they submit it to Health Canada, they're waiting to get an approval, they're trying to plan their production processes, et cetera. Health Canada now is unable, in many, many cases, to tell a company when it might get a final decision. And so it does affect investment. It does affect the ability to produce these products in Canada and make them available to Canadians. So, I've talked quite a bit today about Health Canada. It is critical that they have good resources, expert resources, and that they review products and give good decisions on time.
Thank you.
The third round, Mr. Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. Ms. Hamlin, are you still with us? Thank you.
Yes, I'm here.
Earlier, we talked a little bit about the approval process, and I just wanted to hear from you, not from start to finish, but if you could outline some of the things that you haven't heard that would be beneficial in this process that we need to improve so that Canadians can get access to treatments quicker, more reliably.
Thank you for the excellent question, Mr. Chair. There are numerous duplicative processes that are applied in Canada between the submission of a new innovative medicine to Health Canada and that medicine actually coming onto a public formulary so that Canadians have access to them. On average, that time frame between the beginning of the regulatory review and formulary listing is 3.5 years after a medicine is launched, for example, in the US or in Canada. The process is regulatory review at Health Canada. That is followed by what is called a health technology assessment by the Canadian Drug Agency, followed by lengthy negotiations around pricing with the Pan-Canadian Pharmaceutical Alliances, followed by negotiations with each of the provinces and territory. Many of the processes are duplicative, and they are not happening in parallel, they're sequential, and that adds a tremendous amount of time. And what that means is a patient with cancer who is waiting for this new cancer medicine, it can be a question of life and death. So that really needs to be addressed, and it becomes a much more pivotal issue in the context of the US putting the highlight on the pricing in Canada. That is, Canada is one of the 8 countries with most favored pricing, and the US is really putting the limelight on that. And that puts a great amount of risk on medicines being launched here because we don't have this clear, predictable, supportive policy environment that is needed to actually launch medicines here. And we have some numbers actually from our membership that suggest that already at least 10 medicines have not been launched in Canada in the past few months because of the uncertainty that is created from the most favored nation pricing policy that's triggered by the US. So that is significant for Canada, and it involves mostly cancer medicines.
Thank you. You kind of mentioned a little bit about price reform. So how can we be assured that the pharmaceutical companies are engaging in transparent communication with the Canadian-based innovation so that we are getting our best prices for Canadians?
The innovative pharmaceutical industry is
sorry to interrupt you, but it'll have to be a very short answer.
Yes, very interested in working together with government to find the right policy solutions that work for Canada, that works for Canadians, and that assures that Canadians get the medicines they need when they need them. I think it's important to note that Canada has underinvested in innovation for a long time. And that is why we find ourselves in a situation where we are rather dependent from global supply chain. On the other hand, that is also a good thing because that is how Canada has access to the most innovative discoveries that are, tackling cures and tackling prevention.
Thank you. Dr. Summers. Your commentaries have criticized liberal narcotic policies like the so-called safe supply, and I dislike safe supply. I think it's a terrible word. I think it should be controlled supply. But how has government censorship or data suppression prevented effective strategies for addictions treatment within a sovereign pharmaceutical framework to protect Canadians' health and well-being? And again, I'm going to have to ask you for a short answer, please.
Two quick ways.
Like 10 seconds.
How about 15?
Hurry up. 15 seconds.
The ability to flow money without disclosure into points of influence, universities, researchers, clinicians, distorts the appeal.
I'm really sorry. We're way over here.
Chair, could we get him to table that for me, please? Thank you.
If you could do that, please. Table your response, that'd be fantastic. Okay, Mr. Danko for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. A couple questions to Ms. Hamlin and maybe Ms. Crichton. Ms. Hamlin, you started your initial remarks bringing forward a number of Canadian success stories. And I just want to highlight a few in my riding in Hamilton, West Ancaster, Dundas. Life Sciences being the largest employer in Hamilton. Omnia Bio is a CAR T cell therapy pharmaceutical company that's developing pediatric brain cancer medications. Fusion Pharmaceuticals developing medical radiation isotopes and therapies, which was recently acquired by AstraZeneca for, I think it was over $2 billion. And Adam V, also in the radiopharmaceutical industry. So my question first through you, Ms. Hamlin, is how can we help those Canadian success stories scale and grow to be able to compete on the global market?
What we need to do is we need to create an environment for these companies to actually be successful and to go beyond the discovery and the development to actually reach Canadian patients. It's quite shocking to hear that many success stories in Canada, and we have seen several. Michel Bouvier has spoken to some. The medicines are actually not getting onto our formularies, and it is because of the lengthy delays. It is about the processes that need to be modernized, that create that environment, that set positive market signals. So now the industry is competing globally, and we just have to look to China, for example, that is attracting a third of pharmaceutical innovation today is coming out of China. Why? Because in 2015, China invested into regulatory reforms, invested into R&D, invested into clinical research infrastructure, invested into partnerships, and now we see this accelerated growth of innovation in China. What we need Canada to do is to be strategic and to think, not only short term, but short, medium, long term, to build an ecosystem that sets the right market signals. And what that needs is clear, predictable, supportive policies to bring innovative medicines to patients.
Thank you so much, Ms. Hamlin. And in the context as well, you talked about the risk at the border. So those three pharmaceutical businesses that I mentioned make very time-sensitive products, and they've actually mentioned the uncertainty at the U.S. border to getting their medications back and forth as a constraint on their business. But I wanted to go to you, Ms. Crichton, if you had anything to add on how we help those Canadian businesses succeed.
Well, I think Bettina's right, is that we need an environment that supports the continuum from innovation through to production. Certainly, innovation is certainly important. Vaccine production is certainly important. But that's not what Canadians take every single day. Those are not the drugs that you open your medicine cabinet and find. Those are not the ones on your bedside table every night. If we don't have access to essential medicines that are made here in Canada, we are very vulnerable, and we are beholden to the rest of the world for our supply. And so if we don't have a healthy environment for drug production, and that is what we are talking about, then all of the innovation can go on, but it's going to end up somewhere else anyway.
Sorry to cut you off there. I just got about 45 seconds left. I wanted to switch gears a little bit to the labor market. And in particular, what is part of Canada's commercial advantage in science and research technology, representing a riding that has three post-secondary institutions, McMaster, Mohawk, and Redeemer? How important is it to have that access to the best talent in the world? Ms. Crichton?
I said it in my remarks that Canadians are very good at making medicines. The companies that I represent have deep Canadian roots. They have been here for decades, from the 60s and 70s, and they have created a workforce in Canada that is particularly skilled at making medicines. There is not enough support for that end of the spectrum, in my opinion, in workforce support. And so many of the people who work in these facilities are recruited from elsewhere in the world. They come to Canada, they've had experience in drug manufacturing in places like India, and you walk around a facility in Canada and you see many of those people. New Canadians contributing greatly. We should be able to train people here in Canada to do that as well, because workforce is an issue. There's always job postings in all of these companies, and they have difficulty filling those roles.
Thank you. And now on to Mr. Blanchet-Jean.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Question pour Madame.
Thank you, Chair. A question for Madam Hamlin. Now, the industry makes about 10% of its sales in Canada. This ratio today, rather, is 4 to 5%. How do you explain the decline? Well, it has to do with the commercial environment in Canada, which does not allow for pharmaceutical companies to really commercialize medicines, and they cannot put these on lists that are accessed by patients and physicians. So it's not a very open environment in terms of innovation and commercialization of innovative medicines. So this keeps companies from investing, and it is bound to get worse with the executive orders coming from the President of the United States. So we need to Ms. Samlin, so the investment environment are not favorable, so you're not respecting your obligations. Canada represents about 2% of the pharmaceutical market globally. So do multinationals see Canada as a market to sell medicines or a place to invest? While the two go hand in hand, the industry invests $3.2 billion in research and development per year in Canada and employs 110,000 people and has an impact of $18.4 billion on our economy. So we need to recognize the scope of the investment made by the industry, but the government is delaying approvals and reimbursement of medicines. So the two go hand in hand. It's not one or the other. The medicines need to be approved for patients, and that has to do with the investment. So what you're saying, Ms. Amlan, if you don't seem to be respecting your 10% target of research and development, well, it's a partnership between the government and the industry. But the industry invests quite a lot in Canada. So it's whose fault is it, Ms. Samlin? Who makes up the environment? You keep referring to the environment. Well, what needs to be understood is that let's not go back in time. Let's look. Well, we need to understand the past to have guidelines for the future. Thank you.
Okay, so that's the end of that round. Mr. Strauss for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Watson, a couple of final questions. Are you aware if any of the opioid products you manufacture are currently accessible through vending machines in Canada?
I'm not aware.
Would you be able to table that with us?
I'm sorry. Would I be able to
table that with the committee in written form?
Come back to you with that?
Yes, please.
Yes.
And would you be able to tell us in general how much revenue is generated from opioids in vending machines?
I couldn't tell you that.
Okay. Dr. Summers, I'm still terribly alarmed by this story of you being ordered to destroy data by the BC government. Who ordered you to destroy the data, and why do you imagine that they ordered you to destroy your data?
Well, the order came precisely 1 week after I delivered a briefing to provincial deputy ministers. I was told directly by one of the deputy ministers in that meeting afterwards that my remarks had angered him and some of his colleagues because I implied that the provincial government was not optimally handling the so-called addiction and homelessness file. And I didn't speak in a way that was, I was surprised by his remarks, but I could understand in hindsight why he might have reached that conclusion. I thought after our years of working together, he wouldn't be so easily offended. But that was the explanation.
So, to my understanding, you're a full professor at a Canadian university. You did this research study for 20 years. You gathered the data. You published the data as randomized control trials. Like this seems like an incredible departure from normal scientific practice to have published data become destroyed. Do you have any comment on that?
Well, there's no question it's an extraordinarily heavy-handed tactic by a government. It definitely caught me by surprise, and it amounts to significant overreach. The research in question included randomized trials, data collected with individuals' consent, pharmaceutical comparisons.
Knowing that you benefit from parliamentary privilege, can you say the name of the person who ordered you to destroy this data?
So Mark
Point of
Sieben
order,
is the
Chair.
deputy. Oh.
Like, this might surprise you. I'm very interested in this testimony, but this, again, has nothing to do with pharmaceutical sovereignty. So could the member please at least make a pretend effort
Point of
to
order,
link
Chair.
his questions to pharmaceutical sovereignty?
More Canadians have died from opioid overdose in the last few years than died in the entirety of World War II. I think this goes directly
Let's
to
do
our
a study on that then.
This is about pharmaceuticals and it's about sovereignty. I don't know how it could be more clearly in the wheelhouse of the study.
I know the chair is not going to put this committee in order, but just at least pretend.
Are you able to say the name of the person who, benefiting from parliamentary privilege, could you please say the name of the person who ordered you to destroy the data?
Yes, the letter was signed by an executive director named Lee Greiner, Leigh, and her supervisor who called me was Deputy Mark Sieben. I think these matters actually are directly related to sovereignty in the sense of us Canadians being able to exercise due control over the ways that pharmaceuticals are dispensed and knowledge about their effectiveness. On the one hand, that's internal, and secondly, the points I raised about financial disclosures or the absence of a need to disclose funding that's provided to clinicians, universities, and others is a distorting influence that to me signifies an external threat to Canada's sovereignty.
Yeah, may I say that I absolutely agree with you that if multinational pharmaceutical companies are using big bags of cash to determine British Columbia's anti-scientific policies on this file, then that absolutely speaks to our sovereignty. So thank you for your bravery in speaking with us about it now. You said something interesting about you don't know. You don't believe there's evidence for the Pharma First strategy that has been employed nationally. And I just wanted to ask, do you include non-opioid pharmaceuticals like gabapentin for alcohol use disorder or buprenorphine like Sublocade for opioid use disorder, alcohol and opioid, in that assessment, or are you speaking mainly of opioids?
I was speaking predominantly of opioids and and also stimulants, major classes of drugs, and in relation.
We're really pressed for time, so I just want to say, when you have this story of a violation of your academic freedom and open scientific inquiry and destruction of data, do you think that this problem of government officials maybe not heeding the best scientific evidence available is part of what has caused an entire national obsession with this idea of safe supply for the last 10 years?
Yes.
It's incredible. So what...
Part of the confidence of my answer is that prior to the past decade, there was a much more well-rounded base of evidence in informing direction in the field of addiction, informing policies in the field of addiction. And I'm old enough, my career is long enough that I've lived through more decades of openness and more purposeful forward innovation in Canada than the last decade represents. It's been slightly surreal.
Okay, and Dr. Summers, is when you give that short answer, yes, about what you see nationally, what have you observed from the federal government in terms of maybe not heeding the best scientific evidence?
Very briefly.
Belated steps back. So a belated step not to renew the safe supply pilot programs last year, a belated step not to renew the decriminalization so-called experiment in BC, but no statements regarding what we're going to be doing instead.
Okay, thank you. And Ms. G.
Thank you,
bring us
Chair.
home.
Thank you, Chair. And my question is for innovative medicines. Bettina, she's online? Just double checking. Oh, amazing.
Yes.
So Health Canada is advancing regulatory modernization through initiative like the Reliance Order, as we mentioned before, and a modernized clinical trial framework. From your perspective, or from your members' perspective, how important are these reforms in strengthening Canada's life sciences ecosystem, and how would that help ensure, that translates into more research, investment, and innovation in Canada as a whole?
Thank you very much for the question, Mr. Chair. The reforms at Health Canada are very important to create an environment that is, clearer, more predictable, and that provides access to medicines faster than currently. The reliance is, as it suggests, relying on trusted regulatory agencies around the world, like the U.S., like Europe, and it is not compromising in any way the safety and the commitments Health Canada has to Canadians. What is really critical in this work of Health Canada is to ensure that there is connectivity with the downstream agencies that, after Health Canada arrives at an approval, then do another round of clinical reviews, a health technology assessment, etc. It's really important that there's sort of a downstream impact of the great work that Health Canada is doing. But our members are applauding the work of Health Canada, and we're working closely with them to help them with any data or evidence they need from us.
And thank you so much. And to your point, right, Bettina, it does provide a lot of predictability to the sector. And as you know, we've made also significant investment in life sciences through research funding, biomanufacturing initiatives, and innovation programs. Again, from your perspective and your members' perspective, where are we already seeing these investments make a difference in attracting pharmaceutical research and innovation to Canada?
The investments the federal government has made in research and does every year through the research councils, the investments in the biomanufacturing strategy, recent announcement of the defense strategy with the Life Sciences Fund, recent announcement of NRC around medical countermeasures. These are all really, really important investments that help the sector. I want to emphasize that several of our members are also in the manufacturing space, and organizations like Sanofi have partnered with the federal government to support the development of vaccine facility that can be that are multifunctional, so that during a pandemic, these vaccine facilities can actually help out in Canada directly. Gilead is doing APIs in Alberta. GSK is producing vaccines in Quebec. These investments are really, really important. And what we need to make sure is that these investments carry the fruit they're intended to be, in that they attract continued investment by our members, by the pharmaceutical industry, and what is needed in order to assure that in the context of MFN is that we create these policies that ensure that we decrease the time to patient and we make this environment more predictable, because other jurisdictions do just that. They compete, they build out their life sciences infrastructure and strategies, and they create predictable environments for the pharmaceutical industry to launch their medicines here. And in Canada, as I cited earlier, that is at risk.
And just really quickly, right? I think there was a number mentioned before that the sector really spurs up economy, create jobs. I just wanted to, from your perspective, how important is our talent attraction pipeline in also attracting pharmaceutical investment? Just really quickly, I don't think I have a lot of time.
Yeah, talent is absolutely critical, and it is one of the things that our members use to sell Canada to their global organizations, because we have the highest levels of education in Canada. We have top-notch universities across the country. We have incredible talent. What we want is the industry to flourish here so that we can hire this talent and the talent can stay here in Canada.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Chi. That brings that segment to the end. I do have one more question. I'm going to take Chair's prerogative as per Standing Order 20.147 for those who are paying attention to those. Dr. Summers, are the pharmaceutical companies here today making money off safe supply, and is this a conflict of interest?
Honestly, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question. Sorry.
Okay, thank you with that. And with that, today we shall adjourn. Thank you for all the witnesses for coming in today, and thank you for the committee, and we'll adjourn till next Thursday.